Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 54th episode of TechLifeSkills with Tanmay. My name is Tanmay Bakshi. Happy Easter to you, everyone. Hope you're all enjoying the long weekend, and thank you very much for joining me today. Now, lots of industries predate modern technology, of course, by a long time, right? Modern technology is just that. It's modern, it's new. And real estate happens to be one of those industries, one of the oldest in the world. And yet it just so happens that these kinds of industries are actually the ones that I think stand to gain a lot from technology, modern technology, things like AI, blockchain, IoT, and they can really be transformed by this kind of tech. And this leads me today to the world of PropTech, or property technology. Now, recently we've seen all kinds of advances and innovations in this world. For example, if you're an avid Kagler, you might have actually worked on the Zillow home value prediction little task there. And so this is some really fun stuff to work on. But there's so much more that happens at that intersection. It's not even just about technology. It goes all the way from the mentality of consumers and businesses and so much more. And so that's why today we're being joined by Lynnette Sacchetto, Director of Research and Data at the Property Finder Group. Lynette has lots of experience within this domain of PropTech. For example, she actually helped set up the partnership between Property Finder and the Dubai Land Department, which led to the formation of Mawasher, which is noted as Dubai's most significant initiative launch in 2019. And so as you can tell, there's a lot of amazing stuff that's going on at this intersection. As a matter of fact, actually, Lynette is from Dubai, which is one of my favorite places in the world. I've been there a couple times, and it's pretty incredible. And so now, without any further ado, let's go ahead and welcome Lynette to the show. Hi, Lynette. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Tanmay? Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
Thrilled to be here.
I'm glad to have you on the show. I'm really excited to dig into the world of real estate. The first thing that came to my mind, being a SpongeBob SquarePants fan, the first thing that came to my mind when we started talking about this episode was that one scene when SpongeBob and Patrick were selling chocolate, and Patrick's suggestions for sales were ignored by SpongeBob, saying that we should we should wait until they sell real estate. And so now let's talk a little bit more about how we can maybe modernize this field a bit more and not need to do the kinds of stuff that Patrick wanted us to. So let's dig into that, shall we? But first of all, though, before we get deeper into the world of real estate and tech, I do want to start off by hearing a bit more about you. So would you maybe want to tell us all a little bit more about who you are and how you got to doing what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you all for watching this morning in the States. As Tanmay said, I'm coming from Dubai, so it's 7 p.m. at night here. So my name is Lynnette Abad Sacchetto. I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois. I've been living in Dubai since 2007. In Chicago, like I said, I was born and raised in the South Side. I came from very humble beginnings, went to Catholic schooling, which is where I fell in love with technology, which is my first passion. And then before moving to before moving to Dubai, I lived in Las Vegas for 8 years, which is where I fell into my other passion, which was real estate. And then I moved to Dubai, as I said, in 2007, which is when I started in PropTech. I've been living here ever since. I'm a mom of 2 beautiful girls. And yeah, just enjoying life in Dubai.
Wonderful. That's great to hear. As I mentioned, that's one of my favorite places to be. Hopefully, after COVID, we can actually, start traveling again, and I can be in Dubai. But as you mentioned, technology is one of is really your main passion, and prop tech, of course, is the natural extension of that. Being as interested as you are in real estate as well. I mean, I feel like technology. I mean, this is a theme that's brought up in a lot of episodes. Isn't really even as much of its own thing as it is the infrastructure for practically every other domain. So when you see really any field and you're interested in technology, it just makes sense that you want to apply technology to that domain, right? Because that's sort of a very natural extension. And so before we get deeper into prop tech, I do want to understand what led to that passion of yours with technology, right? What led to that passion for you?
Well, as I said, I went to Catholic school ever since actually until university. And I was thinking about this the other day when I was thinking about this interview. I don't know why. I don't know how, because as I said, I came from very humble beginnings. It was the South Side of Chicago, more like a lower income kind of community. However, for some reason in second grade, I was 7 years old. My school decided to open a computer lab.
Mhm.
And this is where we had the first computer I've ever seen, and they were all Commodore 64s. And I remember walking into the room, and it was U-shaped, and it had all these Commodore 64s sitting there. And I remember the nun saying, okay, class, you're going to have your first programming class is called basic programming.
Mhm.
And we're going to continue this class on a weekly basis. And I don't know, I just, it's kind of like the movies, I saw the computer and I hear, like music in the background. I was just so fascinated with it. And then as soon as we started getting into programming, basic programming, I remember, as I said, I was 7 years old. So, it was like drawing a stick figure, waving, or, maybe saying a few phrases. But for me, that was fascinating that I was able to do that on a computer and not on a piece of paper. And that's when I instantly fell in love with technology. And that grew. Now, I'm not going to date myself, but this is many, many years ago. So when I went into high school, the internet was not yet created.
Mhm.
Okay. So in high school, in my computer class, it was just like learning how to use Word, Excel, but it didn't matter. Whenever I can get onto the computer, I just wanted to be on and just like play around with it and figure out what else I can do with it. And then I remember Prodigy, which was our first, way into the internet,
Mhm.
dialing in with the modem and you have to wait. And I had that, it was like my junior or senior year in high school. And that really just turned my world upside down when it came to technology, because I realized, okay, now we can connect into other gateways. We can have communication with other people. We can look at other things outside of just what's in that computer.
Yeah.
And this is when I just stuck with it. And I stuck with it all throughout university. While I was in university, I was working help desk at a very large bank in Chicago. And then I ended up working full-time for them through university. And then right before the dot-com boom, right when I was about finishing university, that's when I started working for Sun Microsystems, which at that time was Netscape.
Yeah.
And I was working client-facing on their consulting side.
Mhm.
Then that led to Microsoft and to Oracle years down the road. And that's kind of where I stuck within that technology sector.
Very nice. That is so fascinating to hear, and particularly what's really sort of interesting to me is to see that throughout time, right, this sort of general passion that people have had for technology actually, I feel like it almost kind of relates to my story and how I got into the world of tech as well. Because if you take a look back when I was like 5, is when I initially sort of started at least being curious about technology. Right, my dad used to work as a computer programmer, just watching computers all day was fascinating to me. Right, and when I started, I actually also started through languages like Fox Pro and Visual Basic, right? So kind of like you did, just the sort of next generation Basic, I guess. And then from there, actually, funny that you mentioned it because I'd completely forgotten about this until just now, as you said it. One of the first things that I'd actually done, this was after I learned some programming, is I built a little app to help make stick figure animations in Visual Basic. So yeah, actually pretty few parallels. And then, I guess when you were sort of growing up, the internet and, the sort of dial-in stuff, that was relatively new. That was like a next generation of what you could do with technology. That completely changed what technology meant. And similarly, throughout my journey, of course, the internet was pretty normal, right? Of course we have the internet, right? I was a kid. I took that for granted. I didn't realize how great that was. But then I saw Watson playing Jeopardy, and I'm like, this is the next generation of technology. This is AI. I want to figure out how to have computers understand natural language, right? So I think it's really important that as kids, we actually get people introduced to the world of tech, because, how else are they going to know if they're passionate about it, right? You happen to be, and it's great that you had access to those resources to, really spark that passion. So now we know how you got into the world of technology, which is really really fun to hear. Thank you for sharing. But now real estate. So you mentioned that this is something you got passionate about as you were in Las Vegas. Why exactly was that? What got you so passionate about real estate? And then when you went to Dubai, how did that passion sort of intersect with technology for you? What was that spark?
Well, okay, so actually, ever since I was a little girl, I always loved to look around construction, like whether it was roadways, infrastructure, or it was buildings. I don't know. I just had a fascination with construction, just how things were built. And then I remember in university, quite a few of my friends went into the real estate business in Chicago. And I was amazed by the MLS system. Again, this is like a technology where, it linked all the properties. You were able to find information almost in real time and in any given property. You're able to see history of this property, prices that it transacted for. You saw who owned this property. So I remember being intrigued with the MLS system. So if we fast forward, I moved to Las Vegas. So I was consulting for, at that time, it was Microsoft. And I was literally living on the plane and in hotels every single week. And this lasted for years and years and years. And then I moved to Las Vegas, and I kind of just wanted to take a break. So this was maybe 8-9 years after consulting in the IT sector. And at that time in Las Vegas, the property market was really hot, especially if you were like flipping homes, buying homes, fixing it up and selling it. There was really good return on the investment there. So, I bought a few properties, and then I realized with the real estate agents that I was working, I thought like, oh God, it's like, really, I think I can do this, just the lack of information that they had. And me coming from a technology background, I really wanted the data. I wanted the figures. I wanted the numbers. I wanted yields, return on investment. Give me like some hardcore stuff I can deal with. But I really wasn't getting much substance from the real estate agents. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to go get my license. In the US, as you may or may not know, it is a vigorous process. It takes months to do. You have to go through many different exams. But I took time off. So I said, I'm going to do this. So I got my license, and then I started working. It was a unique brokerage. It was they focused on not only residential, but also commercial, as well as business brokering. So mergers and acquisitions of companies. And I found that very interesting from a mathematical point of view. But I really got into property, and that curiosity that I had as a child of just seeing construction and buildings come up and roadways in Las Vegas at that time, it was booming. So it was all around me. And I just loved walking into a beautiful home and just looking at it, looking how people decorated it, just from something as minor as that to then talking to an investor or to a client to show them the data and the figures on how much money they can make depending on their scenario. So after 2 years working for that brokerage, I started my own brokerage. And I did that until I moved to Dubai. And one thing that I did, I remember in my brokerage, and even when I started as a real estate agent, at that time, again, we had the MLS, but we didn't really, agents were not utilizing technology. So CRM systems really didn't exist unless you had something within the office and it was like on Excel or, something like that. Real estate agents did have websites, but it wasn't really, not like how it is today, especially in the US. So I remember digging, and there was quite a few companies in Silicon Valley in the Palo Alto area that were focusing on real estate technology for real estate professionals. And I really just dived into that. And when doing that, I was able to increase my lead flow significantly. And of course, I use technology to capture all my leads. And then within 2 years, before I opened up my brokerage, I was in the top 1% of all real estate professionals in the state of Nevada. And I have to say, a lot of that was attributed to nurturing leads, to using technology, and of course, building the relationships and networking. So I did that until I moved to Dubai, which was in 2007. And then when I came to Dubai, that was a very interesting experience because this was before regulations were implemented for the real estate sector. So this was before RERA. So RERA is the government governing body for real estate in Dubai, in the Emirate of Dubai. So this was before RERA was established. And I came and I was asked to run a Canadian franchise called Home Life here. And I did that for about a year and a half, 2 years. And it was literally the wild, wild west, just because there weren't any rules, policies, regulations. Everyone was just kind of, going about business in the way that they did in this region before. So that was the brokerage side. And then at some point I just said, okay, I'm just going to take time off and have kids. which is what I did. And then after doing that, that's when I got into the PropTech sector.
That's very interesting to hear. It's what's really particularly fascinating to me is that you've had these two sort of distinct passions, right? There's been that real estate passion, there's been that technology passion. And from the beginning, even as you've been working in real estate, you've always been thinking, you want the data, you want to be able to understand and access the technology that actually goes behind all of this sort of stuff. And, I'm also, I gotta say, I feel like all technologists are kind of the same way in the sense of we are just innately curious about how technology works, right? Like sometimes I'll just be using an application, and just from the way that the application behaves, my mind will start going on this huge sort of internal rant of how exactly that application would work in the back end. If there's this kind of bug in this application, maybe it's because they architected it this way, right? And you're always thinking, how could the technology be better? And so to think that sort of led you into the world of PropTech, especially when you came into Dubai, is really interesting. Now, you mentioned that there was no sort of like regulation, or it was a relatively sort of new market from that perspective when you sort of came to Dubai. And what I want to know is, I feel like within the world of technology, a lot of the time, the sort of the craft of regulation a lot of the time can be annoying for technologists. Right, a lot of people that work on technologies want to be able to work on tech without needing to worry about, the kinds of things the kinds of obstacles that regulation usually puts in the way. Now, of course, it's important because, there's all kinds of considerations that need to be taken into account, but still sometimes, technologists don't particularly enjoy that kind of roadblock. And what I'm wondering is, do you think that might have actually been a reason why you actually got into the world of PropTech, especially when you came to Dubai, because it was a relatively new market and there was more sort of scope for applying this kind of technology in a market like that, where you had that flexibility? Was that taken into account at all?
Absolutely, 1000%. So I came to Dubai, working in the real estate sector, and I'll give you a perfect real life experience. When I first moved here, I knew nothing about real estate. I needed to find an apartment. Okay, where do I go? There really, at that point, there wasn't a Zillow, there wasn't a Trulia, which is the world I came from, right? So I work for Property Finder, right? So I'm the director of research and data for Property Finder Group today. Property Finder, when I first came here, was a classified. So just like your newspaper back in the day, you had your classified section, and then in there we had a real estate section. And this is where Property Finder kind of started, along with a magazine. There was other websites, but they weren't verticals. They weren't like a Zillow, just only doing property. They were horizontal. So they were like your Craigslist. You can buy a car, you can buy furniture, you can buy, whatever. And then you can see apartments and real estate. So it was very fragmented, and really, I would say non-existent at that time. And I remember going on and thinking, okay, let me find out how much the average rent is in this community, which I heard is a nice community, because of course there's no information of communities. There was nothing online in Dubai when I moved here. And I remember, just from hearing from colleagues or from work colleagues, or just, you're in a cafe and you just meet someone, oh, how about this area, or think about this area. So I remember going to an apartment in an area called JLT, which is across the street from Dubai Marina. So it was popular. It was in the process of being built. So there's a lot of construction around. And I walk into the apartment, and this was when supply was very low in Dubai and demand was very high. So I walked into an apartment, and there was like 5 other people there. And the agent comes through and she's like, okay, the price is 250,000 one check. I had no idea what that meant. I'm looking around, some people are like, sitting, one person takes out their checkbook. And so basically it was 250,000 dirhams in one check, because you pay your rent a year in advance. You don't pay at that point. You didn't pay monthly, and actually still it's kind of like that, but it's changed a bit. But anyways, so there was no information, there was no data, there was no website where I can go to. I had no idea how to find a real estate agent, other than just driving around and looking at offices and trying to just find agents, and then also looking at the classifieds in the newspaper. So that, I have to say, it was that experience and a few other experiences that led me to say or think, okay, there is a prime opportunity for disruption,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a prime opportunity to bring in technology and combine it with real estate. At that time, the word PropTech did not exist, but PropTech. And let's try to create a Zillow or a Trulia in the area. So after, as I said earlier, I took time off to have a family. After that, that's when I got into PropTech, and I started a real estate portal. And I did that for a few years before pivoting into the data side of the real estate industry. And today, I mean, I'm sure you're going to ask a few questions on how, like where we are today. But if you look on where we are today compared to 2007, I mean, there's been major leaps and bounds. And I would say a majority of that, or the way that we were able to be so successful in such a short amount of time, was because we didn't have regulations pulling us back.
Very nice. I feel like that actually does make a lot of sense because agility in technology, I think, is key, right? I will personally, and this is something that, I feel like a lot of, developers, for example, gain as experience as they go along. It's worth spending a lot of time in the beginning to build the infrastructure to have an agile environment in the future. And, from a development perspective, that makes a lot of sense. I've personally gone through sometimes great lengths, things that a lot of people would think are unnecessary, but are actually super useful, maybe spending an entire day working on something just to make sure that from here on out, I can iterate quickly with technology. And I feel like even, for further abstracting away from tech, especially when it comes to things like regulations, legal requirements, that's when agility becomes even more important because that's an even harder roadblock, right? And so the fact that you could quickly iterate and come up with new applications and ideas and prototypes and just deploy them and get them out in the world immediately is incredible, right? And I'm sure that actually helped a lot as you were going out actually building these applications, right? It didn't take years of paperwork and trying to convince the right people about your idea. You can just build. And actually, speaking of what you're doing today, I do want to get a little bit deeper into the world of PropTech in particular and the kinds of technologies that you use. But first, I do want to understand a little bit more about the kinds of sort of applications that your new technology or really the sort of PropTech field is enabling you to do, right? So I know that, for example, we've talked about initiatives like Moasher and more. So could you maybe tell me a little bit more about what you're currently working on, and of that work, what are some of the new sort of applications or use cases that are actually impacting consumers today, or even businesses? And can you also tell us a little bit more, at the same time about that initiative that you were a part of?
Sure. Okay, so let's talk about Moasher first, because Moasher is a base for quite a few of technologies that we're currently using today that did not exist before. So Moasher is the first official house price index for the city of Dubai. As you mentioned earlier, this is something that took me many, many years to get the Dubai government, Dubai Land Department in particular, to realize that transparency is key in a vibrant real estate market, especially when you're looking at foreign direct investment. If you're trying to bring foreigners here into Dubai to invest, it has to be completely transparent. They have to understand and compare it to other mature markets in the world. So Moasher, the partnership agreement between Property Finder and Dubai Land Department was signed in 2019 to create Moasher. Now, what is Moasher? As I said, it is an index. It's an index based on a hedonic regression methodology, which is the same methodology that's used, for example, in the Case-Shiller in the US, CoreLogic in Australia, Home Track in the UK. So it is a very solid methodology that's used across the world when it comes to real estate house price index. Within this hedonic regression model, there's three categories. So you have your Las Perles, your Pache, and your Fisher methods. We chose the Fisher methods here in the region, and I believe, so we chose it for Dubai, and I believe it's going to be consistent with all the other Emirates and countries that we're going to go into, because it deals very good with a dynamic market. And here in Dubai, we have secondary property, which is a ready property. So for example, I would sell my house to you, that's in a secondary market. And we also have off-plan property. So this is when a developer builds a property, it's under construction, it gets sold to a consumer. Maybe it gets sold a few times before it's finished, and then it gets released to the market. So we do have different types of dynamics within the market, and that methodology proved to be the best for us. So how are we using, for example, Moasher at Property Finder with our various different applications and products? So as you said earlier as well, Zillow, how much is your home worth? That was like one of Zillow's most popular tools. I still think it's the most popular tool today.
Yeah.
We created the same at Property Finder. It was created before Moasher was done. So it was based on an index, but not using Dubai Land Department data sold transactions. It was only using our listing data. Mm-hmm. So that's the other dynamic. So you have our data, our proprietary data, which is the listing data. And then you also have what's being sold from the government. So unlike in other markets in the world where you can just, like, for example, you can Google and go onto the land registry in the US or in Canada and see all the information on property, that does not exist in this part of the world. Mm-hmm. The first time that came available was a few years ago on the Dubai Land Department website, and then of course through Moasher, through the initiative that we created. Mm-hmm. So that now is the base of our version of how much is your home worth. We also come out with a monthly index, which is a product on our websites, as well as to the consumers. It is free for everyone to see and to have access on. We have a few tools on our website, house prices, for example, which that is the base. So that data is the base on showing you transaction prices as well as listing prices for any given community, any type of property. So that's where we're using Moasher, and we're using it for other initiatives as well. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. And that was a really big thing, not just for Property Finder, but also for the city of Dubai, because I don't know if you're familiar with the JLL Global Real Estate Index. Okay, so JLL, Jones, Lang, and LaSalle and Lang LaSalle. I might have got twisted that around. But anyways, they're the largest real estate consultancy in the world. And they come out with a global real estate index every 2 years. Mm-hmm. For Dubai, it was essential that they increased their ranking on this index. It was a KPI from ever since I can remember. And last year, I am actually proud to say that Dubai moved 3 spaces higher in this transparency index. And the single initiative was Moasher, as JLL mentioned in their report. And now Dubai is at the cusp of transparency. So they just need to move one more notch, and then they'll be on the transparent side with all the other mature markets in the world. Also, Dubai is the most maturest real estate market in the MENA region since that shift in the JLL Global Transparency Index. So it was very important for Dubai. Mm-hmm. Now, there's so many other types of technologies that we use. For example, AI and machine learning. Mm-hmm. That fuels so many of our algorithms, whether it's our recommendation algorithm, so recommending what properties people see, mm-hmm. or maybe what agent they see based on their search patterns. So, for example, if someone is searching in Dubai Marina, as I mentioned earlier, which is one of our most popular communities, they might get recommended an agent who is considered an expert in that area. Also, one thing that I have to say that I really valued during COVID and during the lockdown, mm-hmm. was the iteration on all these mobile apps. Mm-hmm. So this is something that you spoke about earlier, agility.
Yes.
I think it was very prominent how a lot of these e-commerce apps were changing their search algorithms. So my 2 favorite ones, the reason why they're my favorite ones is because I can go on one of them, for example, for food delivery. It already knows what I want to eat before I even know myself. So this is something that we use AI and machine learning in our search algorithms as well. And this is something that we want to significantly improve, because going back to basics actually is probably going to work very well instead of having so many features and functions, right? Mm-hmm. Another thing that we use AI and machine learning for, and I can't remember how it was in the States when it comes to listing photos, but for some reason, agents love to take pictures of a toilet.
Okay.
And you will go onto a listing And the first picture you would see, this is before our algorithms.
Yeah.
The first picture you would see would be of a toilet, and it's not the most enticing thing, right? So we created algorithms that actually went through the photos. It was able to judge the quality of the photos. So each listing gets a ranking performance from us. So the higher the ranking they are, the higher they will show on the page to a consumer. So instead of being on page 20, you will be on page 1 if you check all these boxes. And one of them is the quality of photos. And we were able to, using machine learning and AI, be able to tell if it was a picture of a toilet, which we would then just discard, versus a nice picture from the balcony. So something so small like that really changes the user experience, because here in Dubai, the real estate market is quite different than it is, for example, in Canada and the US. There's a lot of listings and we don't have exclusivity. So one property can be listed by 20 different agents. So it's really important, especially for us, to be able to show consumers the most valid listing, meaning it is real, it has the right price, it has the best pictures, it's listed by a reputable broker. And this is how we give various different rankings and those checkboxes that I'm talking about. And this is where we use machine learning and AI, as well as just going through the description and pricing. We're even using it for pricing as well, to be more realistic to the market. And this is where Moasha comes in, versus not. Just, because if it's not, then it could be used as what we call a bait listing. So that is a very common technology that's used. In PropTech, it's very common as well. I know Zillow, Trulia, Zoopla all use AI and machine learning. We do here as well. So as far as the portal is concerned, as I said earlier, we have house prices, we have rent versus buy. So a lot of data-driven tools, which is something that the consumers, as I said earlier, never were used to seeing. They didn't know about communities. They didn't know about prices. They weren't educated. They didn't know how to do a rental contract, how to buy a property. All of this information is on the website. And we use the various different technologies, whether it's the indices, medians, averages, to deliver all of this to the consumer.
That is so fascinating to hear. And particularly what I'm so excited about is, actually, you know what? We're going to draw a parallel to the very last episode of Tech Life Skills with Alyssa Rockwerger. We talked about how artificial intelligence isn't a technology term, it's a user experience term. And machine learning, sure, you can say that's the back end. AI is what it feels like for the consumer, right? If I can open up Siri and if I can talk to it naturally, that feels like AI, that feels intelligent, it's speaking back to me. But if my Apple Watch is detecting a fall and calling the emergency services for me because I took a fall or something, that doesn't feel as intelligent. It feels like something that an Apple Watch would do because it's statistical, right? It feels like, it's analyzing structured data. It doesn't feel that intelligent. But what I love about the specific use cases that you mentioned, like, for example, choosing the most memorable pictures. A long time ago, I actually had, I do believe I do still have a YouTube tutorial and an IBM code pattern on training your own version of MIT's MemNet, which is a data set consisting of images and scores of how memorable or special these images are. And it's incredible to think of how wonderful AI can be in these kinds of applications. And I feel like when consumers don't need to think about the fact that they're using technology is when technology is the most impactful. One of the reasons I feel like smart speakers, for example, haven't caught on as much as people would have liked them to is because whenever you're communicating with a chatbot, like, for example, a Google Home or an Alexa or something on those lines, while they can be incredibly natural today, up until just a little while ago, it would have been extra work to use one of them, because there's always that thing going in the back of your mind being like, how do I want to phrase what I want to say to this bot right now? Right? Like, if you remember a couple years ago, if you wanted to Google something, you'd have to choose the keywords from your query and arrange them in just the right way to get Google to give you the right search results. And before Google existed, it was even worse. Now, being powered by deep neural networks and machine learning, you just ask your questions and it takes care of the rest. right? And it's when this kind of technology doesn't need to be at the forefront of a user's attention is when it's most impactful. When the users don't need to sit down and think, these pictures were selected by AI. That is when the technology is actually most useful, and this is exactly it. Right? It's just subtly in the background, taking all of this information, creating this sort of intelligent model, and deciding what to do to have the user have a better experience without them needing to realize anything. That's so impactful, right? That's what I love about this. And, Mo Asher, of course, with this whole initiative of transparency, I do know that my good friend Andy Martin would have a lot to say about the world of transparency and blockchain. And, in fact, speaking of blockchain, I know this is something you're also sort of interested in and sort of been working on applying. And, there's that one joke that we've referenced on the show a bunch, where there's that one famous guy doing a presentation about blockchain with the flowchart. Do you need blockchain? Pointing directly to no. And, I feel like that's a bit of an exaggeration, to take that with a bit of a grain of salt. Sometimes you do need blockchain. It's sort of just, a knock on how a lot of people will take these random buzzwords and just put them all on a single homepage. They'll play a game of how many buzzwords can you fit on a website. But really, though, blockchain can be incredibly useful in the right areas. And transparency, that immediately begs the question of, well, what about blockchain? And I want to ask, first of all, is there any work that you're doing with blockchain today? And if so, how is that helping you, and where is it being applied today?
Okay, so blockchain, as you said, it was a buzzword, a very big buzzword about 2 years ago. It's all we heard for a whole year. I believe it was 2018-19. Here, actually quite a bit has been done with blockchain, but blockchain is very behind the scenes, so you don't see the sparkly app or anything like that. You actually, as a consumer, you really don't see what's happening, or as a user, you don't see what's happening because everything's happening on the back end. So we have an initiative called Smart Dubai, which is an initiative from Sheikh Hamdan, who is the crown prince and also the son of Sheikh Mohammed, who is the ruler of Dubai. And through Smart Dubai, there's been a lot of initiatives, paperless, and one of the apps. There's so many apps. You don't have to go to the DMV. You can renew your driver's license online, 5 minutes. It gets mailed to you the next day. You don't have to go get petrol. The petrol comes to your house for you, or gas. You don't have to get gas. It comes to your house for you. You just choose the time on the app, and it's all done for you. In that sense, Dubai has been very advanced when it comes to a smart city. And this is what Smart Dubai has been working on. And they've been working on quite a few blockchain initiatives. So the title deed that we have today, so when you transfer a title at the Dubai Land Department, that is done on blockchain already. Mm-hmm. And that's been done on blockchain for quite a bit now. Now, the title deed transfer process is a bit different here, and actually a lot more easier than it is in mature markets, especially like the US. In the US, you have something called title insurance. It goes through a vigorous process to make sure there's no liens on the property, to make sure the title is clean and free to transfer. That doesn't exist here, because here you really can't put liens on a property. That concept just doesn't exist. Whenever it gets complicated, it has to do with inheritance. And that's a whole nother issue that basically goes to the courts, right? Mm-hmm. But here, when it comes to transferring title deed, and this is something that we saw during COVID, if I can talk a little bit about, because I think that this is very key. And I think that this is where Dubai really stands out from other mature markets, just because we've been going along that smart city route for so many years. And like I said, everything's on an app. We are an online now culture. And when COVID hit, like March, so we were in full lockdown, April, May. So April, May, you couldn't leave the house. If you did, you had to get a permit, which had to get approved. So everything was online. So you had to get a permit to go to either the grocery store or for medical services. Mm-hmm. You could not leave until it was approved. All over Dubai, we have CCTV. We have cameras on the roads, on the highway. So if your license plate was caught and you did not have the permit, you were fined automatically. So it was very strict. Now, at that time, not just Dubai as a city, But also on the private sector, this is when everyone started innovating. And this is where we're called like iterating and agility. And this is when everyone just kind of went crazy in the tech sector here. I mean, I remember just from property finders perspective, we created a homegrown technology that only one other portal in the world has. And we did it in 7 days. So the Dubai Land Department and the government were also part of quite a few initiatives, and they digitized a lot of their processes. And you know, government usually is 10, 20 years behind, just in general, all over the world. But not Dubai. Dubai, you were able to register your rental contract fully online. So people were actually able to move when we had the partial lockdown. Not so much the full lockdown, but when we had the partial lockdown. They were able to move the, so if there was a dispute between a landlord and a tenant that had to typically go to an office that you had to go to, you have to file a complaint, everything became digitized. Everything was done online. You had Zoom calls with the judges and between the tenants and the landlord. Everything was streamlined. And one of the things that was digitized was the transfer of a title deed. And I found this quite amazing because Dubai Land Department was able to turn this around. It was probably within 4 weeks where they digitized the sale of a property from beginning to end. And basically, how did they do it? They actually just broke it down to the basics. And this is something that I always talk about, breaking it down to basics. When you have too many features and products, sometimes it gets a little bit noisy and congested. They broke it down. So the buyer and the seller will authenticate themselves via video chat with the Dubai Land Department. And there's many different ways that we can authenticate who we are here in Dubai. If you are a resident, you get an Emirates ID, which is something that's been in existence for over 10 years. And that is your digital profile, your fingerprints on there, your facial scans on there, everything's on your Emirates ID. All your history, your immigration, your medical, your visas, everything's on there. And this is something that gets renewed every time you renew a visa. Okay, so every single resident in the UAE has an Emirates ID. So that was one very quick way to authenticate who you were. Also, Smart Dubai came up with something called UAE Pass. So with your Emirates ID, you register. They have kiosks all over the Dubai, and you basically go put in your card into the kiosk. You verify your fingerprint, and that is your digital stamp. So you can sign documents. You have DocuSign on there. That was one way that you were able to authenticate yourself as a person. And basically, the buyer and seller will sign the MOU via DocuSign, so everything was digital. If there was money obviously there's money to be transferred from the buyer side. There was 2 ways you can transfer money: using ePay, which is a service from Smart Dubai, or via traditional wire transfer. So you're mixing both the technology, the smart technology, with the traditional process, wire transfer from a bank. And then that got sent to an escrow account for Dubai Land Department, and then everything got transferred via a registration trustee, which is like the interim for the Dubai Land Department, and then the title deed was transferred on blockchain. Digital, it was emailed to you. There's a barcode scan for your title deed, and that's how they were able to continue property transfers during the lockdown. So if you look at other mature markets, they came to a halt. You couldn't go to title deed companies, you couldn't sign papers, you couldn't go to a bank. Transfers were not happening in other mature markets. Here, we went on average about 4,000 transactions a month, and in our thickest of the crisis, so April and May, we were transferring about 1,800 properties. So we're still transferring. Life did not stop. The real estate market did not stop, and it was because of that technology. So one of the things that there's a few people on the private sector as well as the public government sector is they're working on improving that transfer on the blockchain by using a kind of a general online marketplace where the buyer, the seller, the real estate agents, the portals, the banks, the government can have all access to that property information. It can also, instead of in addition to using ePay and wire transfer, you can also use Bitcoin or Ethereum if you want to transfer on the blockchain. And then everything goes to a smart contract, so then it gets transferred via the registration trustees. So that is the route. That's like phase 2. This is what everyone is looking forward to here in Dubai for that next phase of transferring properties.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most recent one.
That is so incredible to hear. It's so futuristic, the kind of like fully digital and online technology that you have available, the infrastructure, right? That's something that I feel like we don't get enough attention on is infrastructure, right? Like for example, as you mentioned, during the thickest of the lockdown, things didn't stop. You couldn't physically leave the house, but still, right? The real estate market didn't just come to a halt. It continued to truck on because of the fact that you had this digital infrastructure working for you in the back end still. And like the fact that you can, like for example, transfer money like this through cryptocurrencies is incredible to me. Reminds me of that one story of the guy back in like I think it was 2015 or even before that, spent a couple 10,000 bitcoins on a pizza because they were worth nothing at the time. And now those same 10,000 bitcoins would be $581 million. Could have bought a lot more pizzas with that if you had waited. But you know that's incredible to hear is the level of digitalization that's gone on, and it just goes to show how incredible it can be for the people within the country and the markets if you are able to digitalize that much, because we have the technology. It's up to you to actually start using it and to, for example, implement it in these kinds of use cases where we can now, for example, even in the middle of a pandemic, continue to sort of at least keep these markets going, right? I think that's really important. All right, so I see there is a question via email coming in, TechLifeSkills. This is from Peter, so we will get back to this, but I do want to quickly take up this question from Peter, asking why have property prices in Canada? Okay, this is a bit specific, so let me know if you have thoughts on this. Why have property prices in Canada increased more than 50% in the last year since the onset of the pandemic? Prices are at an all-time high. They're still going up, and bank interest rates are at all-time lows as well. So, and also the second question is, are these two related? The rising prices of property and the bank interest rates being low. So, not directly correlated with technology, but what do you think? What do you think about Peter's question?
Okay, so I'm going to answer Peter's question. This is very interesting. Thank you for the question, Peter. So I'm director of research and data. So I've been doing a lot of research during the pandemic. And during the pandemic, what we did is from the beginning in April, we started to do weekly webinars, just giving as much data to our clients, to real estate professionals as possible, because we realized with data, they will be able to conquer and get through the pandemic and at least understand the trends. What are consumers looking for? What are they searching for? What is the demand? All of a sudden, they're trapped in their house. It's the kids' school. It's their office. Are they looking for bigger spaces? Are they looking for outside spaces? So we were able to give all of this insight to our clients, and it helped significantly. So one of the things that I was fascinated on is that across the world, in most mature markets, we were seeing the exact same trends all over. So I can answer Peter's question. I'm glad I can. So even though I'm not an expert in the Canadian market, but I can say, because I've done a lot of research from Canada, US, China, Australia, and the trends at the high level have all been the same. What happened? Number one, you had a lot of pent up demand. Okay. So I'm not quite sure in Canada, but before in Dubai, 2018, 2019, the real estate market went from not a fall, but it went from a dip to start to be very steady and strong. So prices were stabilizing. And there was a lot of new product in the market. Interest rates were more or less low, not all-time low, but they were low. We were gearing up towards a big event, which is Expo 2020, which was supposed to be last year. Now it's going to be this year. So we had a lot of pent-up demand. In other mature markets like Canada, you also had a lot of pent-up demand. What happened is that when people were at home, they were at home for months. They're working from home. Their kids were going to school from home. They had a lot of time to look at property. And people who were kind of on the fence and thinking 2018, 2019, oh, is this a good time to buy? What properties are out there? What are the prices like? And we're following the market. During the pandemic, realized, you know what? I want that backyard. I want that balcony. I want to move from this apartment to a townhouse. Yes, it's in the suburb, 20 minutes away from the city center, but you know what? Judging by the amount of time I'm spending in my home, it's okay. I'm okay with that. So we saw a lot of pent up demand, and we saw a lot of changes in search and demand. So I remember in April, I remember getting the data back from the data team. And I was just, my jaw dropped. Even though I suspected it, I didn't suspect it at that level. So the searches of villa townhouses increased by 400% in 1 week. Mm-hmm. And that increased week on week throughout the pandemic, and still is the situation today. So to answer Peter, there was pent up demand. Now, this coupled with all-time low interest rates. Okay, so in the US, in Canada, here in the UAE, we are pegged to the US dollar. We've had the all-time lowest interest rates ever existing in this country. Now, also in the UAE, which is different from Canada, our LTVs lowered for first-time home buyers. So initially, you needed 25% down payment to buy a property. Mm-hmm. During the pandemic, they lowered that to 80%. So that was another driving factor that we had here in Dubai. But in Canada, obviously, that did not happen. Mm-hmm. But in Canada, US, and other parts of the world, there was a mixture between pent-up demand, the best interest rates, and then people started seeing properties rise, the prices rise, especially in popular prime areas where the demand started to diminish. The supply started to diminish and the demand just went crazy. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how it is in Canada, but I can tell you here in Dubai, in these prime popular areas, people are, they're overbidding on properties. You have multiple bids on property. Actually, there was an article I was reading, I think it was in Washington, last week. Mm-hmm. The seller had her property on the market for $240,000. Mm-hmm. She ended up with 87 offers, and she sold it close to 500.
Wow.
Yeah. So the same thing is happening all over the world. So Canada's not immune to it. The reason why prices are rising is because, and I'm going to assume it's the same thing in Canada. I'm going to take a good assumption here, is that the supply is diminishing as the demand is rising. You have people who are looking for larger space, larger interior space, larger outside space. There was a huge, and again, I was researching this all those months during COVID. There was a huge shift in a lot of major cities to the suburb area because people didn't have to commute anymore. Mm-hmm. So they were okay to live 20, 30, 40 minutes away from their office because guess what? They weren't going to the office anymore, and they're probably not for the next year or so, if at all. So it was trends that we also saw here, and it seems that's what you're seeing in Canada.
Wow, that is really fascinating to hear. This isn't a field that I've traditionally paid much attention to, so it's definitely fascinating to hear the kind of changes that we've had to go through during COVID and how supply and demand have shifted in real estate, right? It's like the world is so chaotic, it can be really difficult to model these sorts of things. Sure, humans can have intuition, right? Like, for example, maybe when you start off your research, you'll have an idea of, maybe prices are increasing because X reason, people want to, move further away from their offices now. They're fine with that, to have, cheaper cost of living because they don't need to commute, et cetera, et cetera. But until you actually take a look at the data and do that research, it can be hard to pinpoint an exact reason, right? Doing that research is incredibly complex. And that's where things like, for example, Moajer, and I assume the sort of transparency that it enables can also be helpful, right? Sort of being able to take a look at all that data, being able to have that available, I think is really important as well.
Absolutely. And, also don't forget, and a lot of people don't really realize the data that they have internally, like your own proprietary data. Mm-hmm. I remember when I started at Property Finder years back, I remember talking to the data team and their mindset was very data driven. So here's the data, this is where it's stored. You want to know what people are searching for, or the leads that were coming in, how can we match that or put that against searches, or how do we match that or put that against transactions? And what we were able to do during the pandemic is, we have the data of the entire real estate journey, from the listings when they get put onto the website, to the searches that consumers do, to the leads that they send to the real estate agents, down to the transactions that are done at the buy land department. So we were able, this is where you can get a little bit into predictive analysis, right? So in real estate, that's probably the last thing you want to do. Like there's no crystal ball. You don't want to predict, in the future what's going to happen with prices or just the property market. But with data, you can do a little bit of predictive analysis. And with the search data, so as I said, the searches for villa townhouses increased by 400%. Leads were also increasing. The suburban areas were becoming very popular in searches. Guess what? 3-4 months down the road. So here to close a property, it's not as quick as it is in the US. It takes about 2 to 3 months during the pandemic, 3 to 4 months. 3 to 4 months down the road. So July of 2020, we broke all records for the highest amount of villa townhouses that were ever transacted.
Really?
We knew that was going to happen. So if you look at the data and in Canada, you guys have access to all of it. So if you look at the data, you look at the patterns, and some of our very savvy clients use this for business development. They use this for where to strategically place their new offices, to place their agents, to look at the areas that they want to gain new stock in. And there's a lot of insight that you can get with the data.
Mm-hmm. That is really interesting to hear, and being able to sort of have access to that data and then be able to have the technology to actually go through that and find these sort of insights is incredible, right? That's amazing that we can actually do that today, especially in the middle of, for example, this pandemic, as we mentioned. And so, thank you for sharing. That's really some incredible technology. Now, there is something that I do want to get a little bit deeper into. I was actually just reminded of this morning when I was taking a look at some of the work that a good friend of mine, Dr. Shafi Ahmed, does. Dr. Shafi is, according to Time Magazine, the world's most watched cancer surgeon. And what he does is he streams his surgeries live in virtual reality. And so you can actually join with a pair of VR glasses, and you can watch him, operating in real time. And he has this whole, sort of company that's dedicated to, education for healthcare specialists, specifically using virtual reality technology to help them, get a feel for that environment without actually having to be in that environment. And I feel like real estate also has a sort of tie-in to that field of virtual reality. Recently, I was taking a look at this property online, and obviously I haven't really done this many times because I never needed to. And I was taking a look at a house, for example, and I was just curious about the sort of way that you would sort of go about taking a look at one of these things. And I see that there's for example, these 3D tours and things you can do now, kind of like Google Street View but indoors, and it's really fascinating to see these things, and I'm sure that in the future, and I'm sure we already do now, but in the future it's going to be even more prevalent to just throw on a pair of VR glasses and just take a look at the inside of a building, as if you're there without actually needing to be there. And my question for you is, when it comes to that kind of technology, virtual and augmented reality, what kind of advances are we seeing in that domain? Because I feel like VR traditionally has been one of those things where it's a great novelty, right? It's amazing for a demo. It's great if you have the money for it, but it's never something that people have just sort of been like, I'm going to get a pair of VR glasses today. I'm going to use it for X purpose, right? It's only mostly been for gaming. That's pretty much all you use it for. And I'm wondering, has there been any sort of advance to make this technology a lot more accessible and something that people can just use? And at the same time, is this something that is having an impact on real estate at all as well?
Well, like you said, it has always been a novelty. And I remember when we were in the beginning of the pandemic and, everyone in Property Finder, all the different teams were breaking out and figuring out what kind of technologies we can build that will help not only our clients, the real estate agents, but the consumers to just make this whole time just much easier for them. Mm-hmm. And I remember I was at a conference and I remember the virtual reality, putting on the goggles and just thinking, would we ever come to that point in real estate? And to be honest with you, and I'm just going to talk about this region, I don't see that happening anytime soon. Mm-hmm. Why? Because I do think that there's a lot of things we need to do that goes back to the basics. What do I mean by that? So during the pandemic, we really shifted our focus when it came to videos and photos. And so did our clients. So our clients realized they needed to have the best photos on the website because this was the only way people were going to see the property. They needed to have the best videos. They really kicked it up quite a few notches over the last year, our clients, when it comes to property videos. And they also went to their social media channels and they put their videos out there. And this is something that we focused on significantly on Property Finder, just to increase the amount of videos and to increase the quality of photos. One kind of iteration, if you want to say, of virtual reality that we did is we did something called live viewings. And I mentioned this earlier. So we're the second portal in the world to implement this technology. The first one was Hemnet in Sweden. And we came along with our technology 4 weeks after them. And basically what we were able to do utilizing YouTube technology is when you had a listing on the Property Finder portal, a consumer can go to it and they can see the property in real time, live, as the real estate agent was walking through the property, and was able to ask them questions while they were walking through the property in real time. And then the agent would answer the questions and then everyone would hear who was on that stream. Mm-hmm. So for example, the agents walk in, they're like, oh, focus on the floor or open up the cabinets. And this was all done in real time. Mm-hmm. Now, what we learned with this technology, and we closed quite a few deals, by the way, during the pandemic when we were on lockdown, using this technology. But also it became very useful because this was a great tool for people to use to kind of shortlist their favorite properties. So instead of running around all of Dubai, hoping that the agent was going to be there, because a lot of times they're not, instead of looking at 10, 15 properties, they can look at the 10, 15 properties using live tours and then narrow it down to like the favorite 3. And then they can actually go physically see those after the lockdown, or some just, like I said, put offers. So there's like, it's not like the virtual reality that we see today. We had to be, as we said earlier, very agile. We had to really listen to what the agents were asking for, what the consumers were needing. And this is how we came up with that one technology. Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to augmented reality, so we, at Property Finder, we have hackathons, all the time. And we've created virtual reality tools, augmented reality tools. But what we found is it's very clunky and it's very difficult for the consumer to kind of utilize this technology, and it's actually more time consuming than the benefit that they get from it. Mm-hmm. So excuse me, we're not there yet in this part of the world when it comes to technologies. However, we are there for uses of certain parts of this technologies. So for example, if you scan an address of a building, you'll be able to find out information on that property. Something very basic, but gives a lot of information to the consumer.
Mm-hmm. I feel like it's a pretty similar parallel actually to the world of AR on phones, right? It's one of those things that's been promised for the longest time where you can just like point your phone to like a wall or something and you've got this augmented reality experience. But up until very recently, it's just been so clunky that people have decided just not to use it. And that's why developers haven't really supported it in a lot of applications, right? Like if you think about it, previously occlusion barely worked, right? Like if you were to hold up your phone and if you were to open up the little Google AR demo and put a duck on your floor or something, and if someone were to walk in front of the duck, it would put the duck on top of them, but it would actually be behind them in perspective and it would look weird. But now, we've started to see some advances. Like for example, with the latest iPhones, we've got the LiDAR scanners now that are allowing us to do nearly pixel perfect occlusion, right? To where you can walk in front of an AR object and it'll look as if everything's perfectly natural. So we're getting there, right? But it's not easy enough to use for consumers necessarily to be worth using in a lot of cases, right? It's just there's so much overhead associated with using it that the value of using it is usually, in most cases, negative. But it exists, it's possible, and in some cases where it is worth it, it can be used, right? And so I guess we just gotta... I feel like a lot of novelty or exotic fringe items have been brought into the mainstream by companies like Apple, like the smartwatches and truly wireless earbuds and stuff. And so now we just got to wait for them to make a VR headset or something, and then then we'll have use for the
where
technology.
Everybody has them,
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right, we just got to wait for that one product. But actually, speaking of this world of of technology that not everybody has access to yet. I do want to talk a little bit more also today, really quickly, about the world of IoT. IoT is one of those technologies that I think is open ended in the sense of it's hard to define exactly what counts as IoT in a lot of cases, and this is something we've covered before with my mentor and a really fun guy, John Cohn, on the show before. John Cohn's super fun, so if you'd like to take a look at the episode where we talked about IoT, we playfully call him the mad scientist. Then do check that out. I will put a link to that in the description. But now, Lynette, I do want to know a little bit more about there's been this sort of whole trend in the past couple of years towards smart cities, smart buildings, and IoT is sort of a huge part of that. What kind of work have you seen in the world of real estate towards integrating IoT into these sort of buildings? And what kind of experiences can it enable for the consumer? Because I feel like, again, lots and lots of buzzwords, but what kind of capabilities does it enable for people?
So IoT is like one of those things like blockchain. The consumer or the user doesn't really see it. Everything is on the back end. This is,
Mm-hmm.
what facilities management, what property managers are looking at, what developers are looking at when it comes to IoT. Here in Dubai, we have quite a few, no, not quite. We have a handful of buildings that are utilizing IoT. Actually, so I was doing my executive studies in the States, and IoT was one of the topics in one of the classes. And I actually was surprised on how it's really not that much utilized in the US compared to how we were utilizing it in Dubai. So I remember coming back and just kind of looking around and thinking, okay, I know this developer is using it for this, and these, this area, we have an area called District 1, which is right next to downtown, next to Burj Khalifa. That's, all the buildings are basically IoT capable. But at the end of the day, it's how you use that data. Do you use the data? Does the building manager, facility management, the property manager, developer, are they using that data? When you're getting feedback on the various technologies that you have in the building that, for example, temperatures need to rise, they need to go lower. Are you integrating that into your other smart technologies? One thing that we have here, and it just blows my mind, because especially in these buildings with IoT, is you still have that security person at the front desk writing down your name and number. It shouldn't be like that. But it's just lack of properly using the technologies within IoT in the building. But it is, it's more of and this is where that mental change, right, comes in real estate. So you have your traditional developers that always been doing things a certain way. You have your traditional facilities management, property managers who never had to look at data, never knew that data can save them a lot of money, can save them a lot of resources. And this is where that mental change has been coming into play into the real estate industry. And it's coming slowly. Slowly but surely, especially during COVID. During COVID, across pretty much every industry, you had to figure out, how are you going to save cost? How are you going to save resources? If you're an owner of an office building, what are you going to do with all these empty offices? You needed to be agile, and you needed to figure out how to use these various different technologies and these various different data points, for example, that what you have in IoT, to be able to help you advance and accomplish what you were looking to accomplish, or what you would like to accomplish. So I think mental change is a big one when it comes to IoT. I think it's very fancy word. I think people don't utilize it the way they need to, the way they ought to be utilizing it. I think there's a lot of work that we need to do within this sector. But I think people are finally just catching on now. In Europe, they're doing very well. They've caught on. But that's because they were forced to, right? Because of lack of resources and saving money. But I think it's something here in Dubai that we're starting to see slowly change for the positive, meaning it's being used. And I think it's just only a matter of time across the world. We're just going to be, IoT is going to be just as, common as, for example, a search algorithm on a real estate portal.
I mean, it's interesting to hear the kind of application of IoT that we have in the world today. I feel like, again, as you mentioned, it's one of those underutilized technologies. It's one of those it has so much potential, but I think what's particularly hard about applying it is that just like AI almost, there's that one gap between the people who know the technology and the people who know the domain. And that's something that really needs to be bridged to enable people that really know about tech and what it can do and how to build it, and about the actual domain, in this case, real estate, and know it inside and out, right? There needs to be that sort of way to bridge that gap and enable them to work together much more closely than they do today, I think. And we're starting to see businesses realize that because fundamentally, I mean, if you take a look at the North Star metric, obviously every business is there to work on expanding and to continue to earn money, and they do that by providing value to people, and that value can be provided much better if they structure their organization in a way where their domain experts and their technical experts are working together. So we are starting to see that shift, but I feel like that shift is happening, slowly, and that's something that's going to continue to accelerate over time. And actually, speaking of challenges in the tech domain, I know that you being from Dubai, it's you definitely have a lot of, or rather, in that region, there's been a lot of innovation towards making it so that it's more of a technology focused sort of society. And you've perfectly put it. It's fully digital. Your life in Dubai, and it's amazing to see how quickly things can be done in that sense, right? Because you have all this infrastructure. If you want to move something from being done in an office to being done digitally, because you've got all that infrastructure, within a couple of days to weeks, you've just got it done, right? And even while I was there, I've for example, done talks at like schools in Sharjah and Dubai and so on, and it's really interesting to see the kind of initiatives that you have to bring technology to young people, for example. And that actually brings me to the topic of talent. Talent is one of those things that's I wouldn't say hard to find within technology, but there's a lack of developers out there, right? And that's why, for example, when Apple hires, like, the Ian Goodfellow, previously Google AI lead. People are always like, oh, now that Apple has Ian, Siri's going to be way better next year. But then again, there's the entire issue of the fact that they don't collect data and so on and so forth. So tech talent is really, the key thing that a lot of people look to when it comes to technology. And my question is in that sort of region, that part of the world, what does your tech talent situation look like? What level of talent do you have in the market, and how readily available is it? Do you need more? What sort of initiatives do you have to enable more tech talent to be produced within that region? What exactly is it that you're working on?
Yes, we need more talent desperately. That's probably one of our biggest challenges here in Dubai, is just getting the tech talent. From all over the world. And we hire literally from all over the world. You come into our office and it's United Nations, just like Dubai is. We have over 200 nationalities here in Dubai, but literally you come into our office, we have everything from everywhere. So finding tech talent is very difficult. We have a very high level of standard when it comes to our tech teams, our developers, front end, back end, UI, UX, product managers. We have vigorous testing that they have to go through, and stages within the interview that they have to pass before they get to the final stages. So on top of us having a very high bar for tech talent, it's very hard to find talent in this region. And then once you do find talent, so we use recruiters all over the world. When you find talent, for example, in Colombia or in Greece or in Sudan, you kind of, they say, oh, well, this opportunity is in Dubai. And majority of people will say, Dubai. Don't really know much about Dubai other than it looks very shiny and sparkly and there's a lot of big buildings. But most people don't know how it is to live here. And then, a lot of people, especially from the Western world, have like all these misconceptions. So it's very hard to, once you do find very good talent, to convince them to come here. Mm-hmm. And then when they do finally come here and they join, you need to really keep them motivated. You need to keep them engaged. Mm-hmm. You need to make sure that they have a healthy work environment, healthy culture. So it's not just, okay, you found a good tech tech resource, they're on the team and they're just going to be working away. No, there's a lot of teams that are involved that need to make sure that that person is happy. And then on top of it, you have our, we have a very healthy tech economy here in Dubai. So you have a lot of tech companies. You have your food delivery apps. You have your Amazons. You have your Careems, which is what was bought by Uber. And they're vying for talent. So so you find a good talent, you get them acclimated, they're happy in the company, and then you have one of the other companies trying to take them away from you. So it's a very, I would say it's a very dog world when it comes to that here in Dubai. And it's always been our biggest challenge. And obviously you spend a lot of money on finding good talent and keeping good talent, so it's something that we really value as a company. And when it comes to Dubai to bring talent here, actually Dubai's been very good. It's been very proactive. We have a lot of startup incubators. There's a lot of programs between the financial sectors, from private companies that try to bring in talent, from the government that give funding and grants for talent. In the schools, universities are always a little bit, they're not as up to date when it comes to technology, which is the same here. So we do have a lot, though, tech talent coming out of the region. And this is something that has been a very big push by Sheikh Mohammed here, as well as the other leaders in the region onto homegrown tech talent that they really are focusing on. And as I said, there's a lot of initiatives to come here, open up companies, 100% ownership. So yeah, I think Dubai does a really good job when it comes to that.
I mean, as you mentioned, with for example, universities being behind in technology, I feel like that's a common theme across the world. Education in general doesn't move the quickest, and that's a problem, of course, that needs to be solved. It's like, for example, there's even some universities that have like this incredible name, like Stanford, for example, right? So one of my friends goes to Stanford, and sometimes I'll take a look at her like assignments and stuff, and it'll be like, why is this being taught this way? Right? Why? This doesn't, correlate to what's actually happening in the real world at all. But then, that's just how it is. What can you do? And so, yeah, producing tech talent and then being able to maintain it and then being able to compete for a scarce resource in an area like Dubai where there's huge demand for it, I'm sure that's complex. And so, that's definitely a challenge that we're gonna have to work on solving. But I do enjoy how the Dubai government is proactive in that sense, right? I feel like proactive is exactly the right word to use. Every time I've been there and I've seen these initiatives, proactive is exactly the right word, in the sense of, preparing and planning for the future is the key thing, right? It's you can't go into the past and change today's situation, but you can get ready today to make tomorrow a lot better. If you have that foresight to be like, developers are going to be a very key resource, then that definitely helps you out a lot. And so thank you very much for sharing these insights. There's so much more to talk about, that we can't get to. But I'd love to have you on the show again in the future to dig deeper into this world of property technology and the kind of stuff that you're working on and so much more. But in today's show, as for example, we got our question from Peter, and as we've discussed, I've had a lot of different thoughts, right? I've gotten a lot of different insights, all the way from hearing how you're applying AI, right? So making sure that the first thing someone sees isn't necessarily just a picture of a toilet in some kind of property, unless of course it's one of those in Japan. They're super fancy. I love those. But yeah, no. So being able to do things like that memorability detection, having this data transparent and stored on a blockchain. This is so futuristic, and this is stuff you don't really hear about. So thank you very much for sharing. I've learned a lot today, and I can't wait to see where this technology goes in the future. But before we end the show, I do want to ask you, is there a closing message that you want to share with our audience today? Just something to leave them with.
Yeah, obviously clearly I'm very passionate about technology and property. I do feel that the prop tech space, there's so much more room for innovation in this sector. And I hope you continue to follow this amazing and dynamic journey in a world where disruption and mental change meets a traditional industry. And it's going to be very interesting to see how this traditional industry grows and transforms over time.
That is absolutely. I completely agree with you. It's going to be so fun to see how this continues to transform one of the oldest industries in the world, alongside some of the most cutting edge technology that we have today. All right, this is super fascinating. Thank you very much for sharing, Lynette. Again, I've gotten all kinds of insight from today's discussion, and of course, thank you very much everybody for joining us today. Of course, make sure you join us next Sunday. Of course, Lynette's in Dubai, so it's at night for her. But thank you very much for staying up at night and joining the show today. Here it's what is it right now? It's 12:19 p.m. Start at 11 a.m. So make sure you join us next week, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Again, everybody will be joined by, I can't exactly tell you who, but it's going to be a super fun technical episode. We're going to learn about integrating symbolic knowledge and mathematical knowledge into neural networks. So should be really fun. We'll get to take a look at some live demos. Make sure you join us. All right. So thank you very much, Lynette. Thank you everybody for joining us today, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.